Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Beer and Money. My name is Ryan Burklow.
And I'm Alex Collins.
And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about risk and volatility in your portfolio, and specifically around like investing and how you allocate that investment account.
I mean, these are thrilling, exciting topics, right?
Well, everyone knows that they should invest their money. Now, where they invest their money, that's up for debate and personal profile and experience. But everyone wants to invest their money because they know that their money needs to grow so that one day when they either can't work or no longer want to work, that they've got something sitting on the sideline that pays them an income.
100%. And while this may not be the sexiest, most interesting, exciting concept, it's critically important that we get these things right. And we're going to take a little bit of a different tact at it today and try and make it interesting and entertaining, and also help explain some of the hows and whys we should care about some of this stuff.
Absolutely. But before we dive into that, what are we drinking today, Alex?
Today, I am drinking Storm Surge. It's a hazy IPA from Red Hook. How about you, Ryan?
So I'm really excited to announce this. I texted a picture of this to my father. So I am drinking Black Raven's newest IPA called Blackbird.
Nice.
And so for those of you who don't know, my dad used to fly on the RC-135, which is a reconnaissance plane. And part of their job was to communicate with the SR-71 Blackbird when we were stationed in Kadena Air Base. And so I saw this and brought back childhood. And by the way, it's delicious. Now I'm probably extremely biased. I'm sure the picture is really making me love this beer, but I'm loving this beer. So it's an IPA, shocker. So Alex, you need to try it though. I think you'll enjoy it too.
Yeah, I wouldn't. It's put out there by one of our favorite breweries, and I'm not sure that they've put out an IPA that I don't enjoy. This Storm Surge, by the way, kicks in at 6.8%, and it packs a punch. But man, this is easy to drink.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Cool. Well, let's dive into it today. So what's interesting is most people, right? They know that they need to invest their money, right? Most people are investing their money in their 401k retirement type of plan. And when they go to invest their money, they're deciding either with themselves or with a financial advisor around what risk profile they want to have in that individual account. And we spoke about this in the last episode. So we're kind of piggybacking off of that episode. And what risk profile they want, right? And really it comes down to volatility, like how much ups and downs do they want in that account. And so real quick, Alex, we'll steal this definition from our favorite advisor, Bob Kiewit. When we talk about volatility, it's movement of money, and it's specifically around the speed at which it happens, meaning the movement up or down, the frequency of which that happens, and then the depth between the highest high and the lowest low.
Well, and we tested some of those things in the recent memory between, like, if you go back to 2020, you've got, how quickly like the equity market turned around both negatively and positive, and then the quick rebound back in like the May, June, July timeframe. So that's one example. And the other example would be what happened in the bond market in 2020 in reaction, 2022 in reaction to the interest rate hikes that occurred. I mean, we saw the bond market be down 15% in a calendar year, and that's pretty extreme example of what can happen in the bond market.
And what's interesting about the bond market is, we're talking about the risk that we want to have in these individual accounts. So oftentimes an advisor or a client, whether or not they know it or not, are looking at what allocation they want to have. How much of their money do they want to be in really kind of two buckets, if we can simplify it. One is stocks and one is bonds. So they have this two-legged stool that they're typically working with. And so the bond side of it is supposed to be the safer side that lowers risk.
Well, and part of the problem was in 2022, the equity markets were down 20%, and the bond markets were down 15%. So there really
Right.
wasn't any place to hide in that two-legged stool model. And yes, there are alternatives. Yes, there's real estate and other places that advisors can put some of clients' dollars. And we were talking with a senior advisor who's like, yeah, it's really remarkable what's happened over the years. And you and I were like, well, okay, what do you mean? And he was saying, yeah, no, it used to be a three-legged stool. And I briefly remember that conversation when I first entered the industry 20 plus years ago. It used to be stocks, bonds, and cash. And it got changed to just stocks and bonds. And there's kind of two main reasons as to why that change occurred. One is we were in a really low interest rate environment, and we stayed in a really low interest rate environment for an extremely long period of time. And the other is advisors don't get paid on cash. So there's no reason for advisors to hold cash if there's no return and we don't get paid.
Yeah, and that's not to demean any advisors for doing that. That's how we were trained, right? And that's where investing went. And what you and I have spoken about so often is you should be looking at the entire balance sheet, not the individual accounts. And we've really kind of trained clients, not we as in you and I, but the industry has trained clients to just look at this from an account basis only. And when they talk about allocation, they're talking about okay, how much you want to have in stocks, which is a riskier side of the account, and how much you want to have in bonds, which is a less risky or a safer aspect in the account. And we spoke about this in the last episode. Like, well, what's your definition of safer?
Right.
Because, and I think hopefully our listeners, like, we're going to have another question of the day, but here's a question I would love to hear is when you hear bonds and when you hear it's a safer investment, what does safer mean to you? What's your definition? Because what I think people hear is they won't lose the money, like their principal, the amount of money that is in bonds won't go down. They may not get any growth, but it won't go down. And that's not at all what bonds, like that's not how safe they are. They're just safer. They have less volatility than stocks, is really what that means.
And we can go ahead and get into like holding individual bonds versus bond funds. And like there's a lot to unpack there that we're not going to get into today. And again, so much of this is going back to the original notion of like, okay, is it a two-legged stool or is it a three-legged stool? And there are ways and places that we can have cash that live on the balance sheet where we can still get a 3 or a 4% rate of return or more, like a 5% rate of return, even over the last decade and a half, where interest rates were ultra low. So there's ways to go about doing this properly, but we're strongly advocating for bringing back a three-legged stool of stocks, bonds, and cash. Maybe not holding cash in every single account, but if you've got cash on your balance sheet, then we don't need to have as big of an allocation towards cash in each individual portfolio. We may not need to have as big of an allocation towards bonds because the whole point and purpose of the bond piece of the portfolio is to reduce down the volatility. And if we've already done that through a more effective structure, cash in 2022 wasn't down at all. It was up. And so, like, by structuring things where you've got, a 5 or a 10 or even a 20% allocation towards cash on your balance sheet, you really have a lot of the buffer that is needed to be able to have more of those dollars be in equities or stocks.
Yeah, so the purpose of today, most of our listeners, Alex, they're not at retirement, right? So they're still in the asset growth standpoint of or stage of their life. And we're talking about allocation or risk of the overall balance sheet. And it goes to many different areas, not just the volatility of the stock market or the bond, like the market, we'll just call it the market for today's episode, but also the volatility of life.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So having access, and we talk about this all the time, but we're just bringing this back into the conversation. Let's just do the standard example of we've got twin A and twin B, right? Twin A did the allocation around the entire balance sheet and has more cash on their balance sheet, but also because they have more cash, they actually have more stock that's actually invested, right? So they've intertwined that I can't speak. They put their portfolio together with more cash, decreasing the amount of bonds that they have, and added more stock. And when they have that, and that's twin A. Twin B did the approach that most people take today, where they have very little cash on their balance sheet, and then all of their money's in stocks and bonds. Which one of those people, in the grand schemes of life, how life operates, knowing how often we need cash, both in bad things that occur and good things to occur, which one of those twins has a higher likelihood of financial success?
It's twin A all day long.
It's not even close. Like, for those who are listeners right now, sorry to interrupt you, our listeners right now, think about it. How many times in the last 2 years have you needed more money than what your paycheck provided you? And I'm not talking about to go on vacation. I'm just talking about, like, in the grand schemes of life. Like, I just had to spend $2,000 for a plumber. Didn't count on that this year.
Sure.
Right?
Expenses pop up, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. It could be an investment opportunity, like a piece of real estate pops on the market, or a vacation home, or the ability to do something that you didn't expect. And so now having access to that cash becomes invaluable, and we don't have to go through the the mental gymnastics of, okay, do we sell stock? Do we, like, where does the money come from? It comes from the cash. And then we can decide, okay, well, maybe what we do for the time being is, since we borrowed from cash for this opportunity, whether it was an expense or whether it was an investment, doesn't matter. Now we're going to shift where our dollars are going with our new allocation or our contributions. And so, yeah, maybe we cut back on our 401k or our HSA or our investing of whatever kind for a short period of time to rebuild some of that. Or we pull it from a different source and then repay that over time. But there's a lot of choice and flexibility with where stuff comes, and it depends greatly upon what the current economic market and cycle looks like. Maybe the answer is that, yeah, we pull it from investments because the market's gone up 30% or something of that nature. And we deem it's a great time to go ahead and take some of the profits off the table. There's no wrong answer as to how to do this, but by having some allocation towards cash, even if it's just 10% of your overall balance sheet, now we've got that much more flexibility with how we're going about things.
I brought this up before we started recording, and I think it's a great time to bring it up live here. Warren Buffett has been given, like, the authority around, like, the best investor ever, right? And it's also been a known fact that a lot of his wealth has been accumulated, and I forget the exact age. Morgan Housel's the one that has the exact age, but the most of his wealth has actually come after the age of 50. I know it's at least that. And the reason it's that way is he's had like 60 or 70 or 80 plus years of investing in that the magic of compounding interest, right? That's occurred. He's had 80 years to do that, which means 80 years of him not touching that money. Do you think he didn't have cash to have, like, he's had life events occur to him as well? So that's what's not spoken about. Too many people, I think, hear the magic of compounding interest, and all they hear is, oh, I need to invest every dollar, rather than looking at, like, no, we have to look at this in a real life scenario. That's just not how life works.
Well, and Warren's situation has allowed him to keep his investment dollars invested, and he hasn't gotten crushed by market timing, whether it was by his choice or by life events that occurred to him. And by being able to stay invested for such a long period of time, that's what's helped him accumulate the wealth that he has. yes, he's also done an extremely good job of investing. And the way in which you and I invest is different from the way that Warren invests.
Yep.
Like at this point,
That's not to demean what he did. It's just more of what's not spoken about. Like I would love, like, hey Warren, if you're interested, if you're listening to this podcast, I'd love to interview and talk about what you had in cash to be able to do what you did.
and or what sacrifices you went through to be able to keep everything invested.
Yep. So I know it sounds like we're like we're not saying all of your money should be sitting in cash. I want to be clear about that. But we are saying most Americans, even the people that we sit down with that are making $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, when we sit down with them, they typically don't have a lot of cash on their balance sheet. And when we are done working within their plan, we're having to adopt to get more cash in their balance sheet. And we're messing with different things, obviously, so that they can have the best chance of reaching all of their goals and their financial success that they want.
100%. And so much of this has, like we've talked about location of money and other aspects, they're going to affect the distribution strategies that we have on the back end. This is just a small piece of that overall puzzle. And ultimately, with the strategies that we advocate for and help clients employ and deploy for themselves, they wind up with typically better rates of return because we're having more dollars allocated towards equities, because we're being defensive in different ways and allowing more dollars to stay on the balance sheet.
Which takes us to the question of the day, Alex.
Our question today is, how many legs does your stool have? So your financial stool that we're using to keep your balance sheet propped up, is it a two-legged stool? Is it a three-legged stool? Are there more legs to your stool? And if so, what are those legs?
So head over to beerandmoney.net, and at the top of the page is a contact us. That's a great way to answer that question. Or if you have questions from what we spoke about today, it's a great way to reach out to us so that we can continue this conversation moving forward. Look, we started this podcast to help you think differently about your money so that you can be successful in what you determine as success, and hopefully stress less about money and live life with your family the way that you want to. So we hope this episode was valuable for you. And as always, Mr. Collins,
cheers.